What makes you happy?
Be yourself, be positive. Just another mindset.
Hello, friends, and welcome to a new episode of the Just Another Mindset podcast, the show that inspires you to change and live a more exciting life. My name is Ishmael, and each week I bring to you a relevant conversation, message, or topic that will not only entertain you, but help you to change towards a more meaningful and satisfying life, individually and collectively. Let us get inspired and embrace collective changes for the better. In today's episode, I talk to Dr. Ruth Gotian, who is the Chief Learning Officer and Assistant Professor of Education in Anesthesiology and former Assistant Dean of Mentoring and Executive Director of the Mentoring Academy at Weill Cornell Medicine. In 2021, she was selected as one of 30 people worldwide to be named to the Thinkers 50 radar list, dubbed the Oscar of Management Thinking. Recently, she won the Thinkers 50 Distinguished Achievement, Wader Award given to thinker with the potential to change the world of theory and practice, and cemented her place as the #1 emerging management thinker in the world. In this episode, we discuss what success is and what Nobel Prize winners, astronauts, and Olympic champions have in common. We talk about mentoring and doing something important rather than something interesting, while creating ripple effects. Ruth elaborates on how to find your North Star by going through a passion audit, and you will learn why everyone can teach you something. We talk about finding your peak performance hours and about focus and how to tap into it. We detail the power of learning through informal means and reading in particular, and you will be able to prioritize what's important and enriching after this podcast. You will learn how high achievers approach challenges, and that leaving something we are good at for something great is a necessity for success. Wonderful, Ruth. With that, a warm welcome to the Just Another Mindset podcast. And the first question I have for you is, how do you feel and what is on your mind?
We are in hot and steamy New York, and life's not so bad if my biggest challenge is how to make sure my curls don't frizz on the top of my head. But all the curly girls know exactly what I'm talking about.
Indeed, very true. So it's a hot day in New York where you're calling in from, is what I hear.
Hot and steamy.
Okay. And has it been like that for quite some time, or is that somewhat?
Those are our summers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
But it's all right.
Wonderful. All right. Thanks for that, Ruth. And we are, in fact, here. One of the reasons is a book that you released, and I'm going to read the title, which is The Success Factor: Developing the Mindset and Skill Set for Peak Business Performance. And for everybody who's listening on the audio, I think now is the time to go to YouTube because Ruth just showed us the wonderful book cover. And wonderful. Yeah, it's a book that's pretty much everywhere for a reason. And before we go into the details and go down and discuss a few of those attributes that you described in your book, you basically summarize that high achievers share the same 4 attributes. And those are intrinsic motivation, perseverance, a strong foundation, and constantly learning through informal means. And before we look at those 4 in a little bit more detail, Ruth, I would like to ask you, what is success for you?
So, this was the first 2 parts of my research. So I actually went back to school at the age of 43 to get my doctorate and study success. And what I had realized was that we don't even have a definition that we're all using. Everyone has a different definition. And my earlier work was to define success. And what I had realized is that success is a moving target. And it varies based on who you ask. And it varies based on all sorts of things, gender, rank, etc. But the definition that I used and that I used in my research and that I used when selecting the extreme high achievers for my book was that these are people who did three things. The first one is they change the way we do things or think about things or process things. They really created a paradigm shift in their work. That's the first thing. The second thing is, as they were climbing up through the ranks and they were ascending to greatness, they were pulling other people up with them because they realized that a spotlight on other people does not detract from the spotlight on them. And last but not least, when they reached the pinnacle of their success, there was always something on the horizon, always something else that they were going to do. And that always involved mentoring the next generation. And they either did that one-on-one or they did that by mentoring large groups of people. And those are the three prongs to success. That's why it's not about having billions of dollars. It's not about being an influencer. It's not about being famous. It's about doing those three things, creating a paradigm shift in the way we do things, think about things, process things, bringing other people up as you rise, and paying it forward by mentoring the next generation. That's what makes someone successful.
Wonderful. I really like that definition of success. And as you say, we have this paradigm shift, but we also have a lot of mentoring and collaboration. So it always includes more than one person if we talk about success. And maybe if you want to give us a little glimpse of whom did you talk to, and maybe there's a few examples to make it a little bit tangible. What is the collaborative factors that they brought in, or who were they mentoring? Maybe you have some examples for us and for the audience.
Sure. So the people who I had in my study were people who won the Nobel Prize, astronauts, Olympic champions, NBA champions, and each one of them either mentor people one-on-one or in large groups. So take, for example, Dr. Bob Lefkowitz. He has mentored to date, he won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 2012. To date, he's mentored almost 250 people. In fact, he even shared the Nobel Prize with one of them. And I said to him, I said, was it weird for you to share the Nobel Prize with a former mentee? He's a generation younger than you. He's like, no, it's an honor. See, that's the difference. So he does it one-on-one. But then if you look at someone like Dr. Charlie Camarda, Dr. Camarda is an astronaut, and he was the head of engineering at NASA. And when he retired from NASA, he said, that's it, I'm done. But he said, no, we need to change the way our youth are thinking about challenges. We need to change the way teachers are teaching about challenges. And he really wanted to help children think bigger, faster, stronger, take strategic risks. So he created an entire foundation called the Epic Education Foundation to focus on this. And this is what he's doing in his retirement. Probably working harder than he ever worked at NASA.
Absolutely. And that's this relentless change for the better that you described, right? It doesn't stop at a certain age or at a certain bank account or at a certain point, but it continues to grow, continues to change something. And as we talk about mentors, Ruth, it's a little bit of a personal question, but maybe you have an answer for us. How many mentors do you have at this moment? And if you want to speak to it, who are they?
Sure. I actually have a team of mentors, and I don't know that I ever really stopped to count how many I have because I keep adding to them. But they come from different fields. So there's some who are physicians and some who are scientists and educators and finance and lawyers and military, because there's always something that I can learn from other people. And sometimes they're so great because they never tell me what to do, but they push me outside of my comfort zone and they plant seeds that once they're planted, I can't get them out of my head. So for example, when I was first starting my research on success, it originally started with physician scientists. And my mentor, Dr. Bert Shapiro, I was originally planning to look at one institution and try to predict success. And he said to me, that's nice, but do something important, not just interesting. And that alone, that one sentence, do something important, not just interesting, 6 words, changed the whole trajectory of my career. Because instead of focusing on one institution, on what is a nice to have study, I made it a national and then international study on what we need, not what we want. And that really led to all of my research for my doctorate. That led to the book. That led to everything else. Most importantly, that led to a ripple effect to help other people achieve the success that they didn't even know they were capable of. I am unlocking their success because of those 6 words that my mentor, Dr. Bert Shapiro, shared with me.
Wonderful. And that shows the strength of mentoring, right? That shows that a small seed, I may want to call those 6 words at the very beginning or at a certain point in time, can change towards, what is really something important. And I do fully agree that you create a ripple effect, and I do fully agree that the work that you are doing is really, really good and really great. But if we want to go back and maybe we can define this important over something interesting, how can we for ourselves figure out, is this something important or is this something interesting for Ismail or for Ruth? Like, who helps? A mentor may help in this question, but how would you figure out, is it something important or something interesting rather?
So this is the question. One of the people who I interviewed was Dr. Tony Fauci. Dr. Tony Fauci was in charge of all of our infectious disease in the United States, and he oversaw the COVID response, et cetera. And he advised 7 presidents. And when I interviewed him, I said, how do you pick which projects to work on? Because long before COVID, he worked on HIV and AIDS and Ebola and SARS and everything else that came. And he said, if it's interesting, that's like a nice hobby and it's nice for me. But if it's important, it can help people I will never even have the opportunity to meet. And that's how you know the difference between interesting and important. If you are able to create that ripple effect, if you're able with your work to help people that you'll never even meet, and you're good with that, that's when it's important.
When it becomes from good to great or from interesting to important. I love that, Ruth. Thanks for elaborating on that. And when doing some research also for this conversation, I read a few times that you encourage people to find mentors in rather uncommon places or situations. Also something, you're laughing. Is there anything that comes to mind? Where did you meet someone, or who are maybe also mentors that you never thought you would have had?
Look, I am of the belief, and this is something I learned from the high achievers, everyone can teach us something. So the high achievers, sure, they might be more experienced than you, but they might be your friends. They might be more junior to you. I have met the most incredible people that I can learn from. Yeah, sure, the speakers at a conference, but also the people in the audience. They're there for the same reason. I've met people in the airports. I've met people on bathroom lines, coffee lines, Zoom chat rooms, breakout rooms, because there's always something that you can learn from these people. And as soon as you open your mind up to what can I learn from these people, you'll see who you start gravitating toward, whose ideas really get your mind thinking, who really pushes you, who really challenges you. And don't seek it with the thought of, I need to find a mentor. This is something on my to-do list. You want to build relationships and see who you connect with, because the person who might be ideal for you on paper may not be the best mentor for you.
No, I fully agree. And you just said a very interesting word. You said challenge. And if we think about mentors, oftentimes people associate it's a support system, right? I would seek Ruth, ask her for certain support. But what role does also a challenger network, I want to call it, play? And what's the difference, and why is it so important to have support and challenge?
It's interesting. If I'm your mentor and every time you come to me it's because you need something, we're going to have a problem. We're going to have a big problem. And I'm going to be exhausted. And every time you come in, I'm going to start rolling my eyes because I'm going to say, he needs something again, right? But if you can come and meet me at the halfway mark and say, I have this idea. I just don't know how to get all the pieces together, or there's this one piece I don't really know how to do, but you show me that you've done the work. You're coming with the goal, with the plan. Then I'm there to finesse that plan for you and to get you to think bigger than you ever thought that you could. That's what a mentor can do. But if you come in with help me solve my problem, that's not going to be a mentoring relationship that lasts at all.
No, absolutely. I fully agree. And it's rather that challenging element and that finessing element than only support or helping to solve situations, ideas. Wonderful. Thanks so much for that, Ruth. And I classified that to be in the strong foundation attribute, I want to say. And I think there's a few more aspects that we could talk about if we say a strong foundation. And I like to talk about clarity and I like to talk about values because I think it's very important to have a certain North Star or to know why you get up in the morning. And I'm aware that you also talk about something like the passion audit. And my question is, what do you understand a passion audit to be? Why is it so important? Maybe we can look into that a little.
Sure. So let's start with that passion audit. So the passion audit really works with that first element of success, which is that intrinsic motivation. The intrinsic motivation comes from within. It's why you wake up in the morning. It's why you can't quiet your mind at night. It's why you love doing what you're doing. It's why even if you get a challenge, you're like, that's okay. I'm still going to get this done. This is very different from extrinsic motivation, which are the diplomas, the bonuses, the promotions. That's when other people are judging us. And when other people are judging us, what we call extrinsic motivation, that's really hard to maintain and sustain. So we need to find something that comes from within. And one of the things that I quickly realized was that just because you're good at something doesn't mean you're passionate about it. So my first 2 degrees were in business and I worked in finance and international banking. I was good. I got tenure within 9 months. I was really good, but I did not like it. I was not walking with a whistle in my step. I was shuffling my feet, barely able to get out of bed. But there's a very big difference when you love what it is that you do. Whatever the challenge is, you're going to get over it, around it, through it to the other side, because this is what you are meant to do. And people have a hard time figuring out what it is that they are passionate about. And one of the steps I take people through when I'm coaching them is through a passion audit. And the passion audit is a simple 3-column exercise that we can really differentiate between what you're good at, what you're not good at, what you're good at but don't enjoy doing, what you do on your time off, right? All of these kinds of things. And this, every time I do it with someone, I am able to find something that they love doing that they hadn't even appreciated. And we work on ways to integrate that into their work. And if your listeners want to do their own passion audit, first of all, one comes with the book, The Success Factor, but they can also go to my website and download one for free. But here's the tip. Every time you have a transition in your life, a new job, a move, a new partner, a child, a pandemic, you need to redo the passion audit. Because one of the things that we've realized during the pandemic is that our motivation shifts. And they shift when we have transitions in our life. That's why what worked for us before may not work for us now. So we really need to take a look at that and redo this passion audit every time we have a transition in our life.
Mm-hmm. No, I absolutely agree that it does make sense to do that every once in a while in intervals, right? And it can be fine for 5 years if you feel very well, very great about things that you're doing right now. But it could also be that you have to redo it after 3 months because you figured something out and it's a dead end somewhat. And
Absolutely.
you rather figure out what your passion is. And talking about that ends, I don't know where this question will go, but you say, okay, passions or the passion audit, we have to redo a few things. But I could imagine that the passions are also always created on a base of values that you have as a person yourself. And Ruth, I would be very interested if you want to share with us a few of your core values, and also maybe you talked about the transition of yourself going to school again once you're 43, transitioning from a financial industry career into becoming a best-selling author now. But
Yeah.
maybe you want to talk a little bit about, your values, and did they change, or is it an interpretation of your values rather that changed?
So it's really interesting. Whenever I ask someone their values, and this happened the same thing when people ask me for my values, I would say hardworking and honest and authenticity, right? What we hear over and over again. But then my friend Aisha Bursell, she's the author of the book Design the Life You Love. She taught me an exercise which changed my life. And she said, "Who are your heroes?" And I start listing my heroes, one of them being my grandmother. And she said, "Well, why are they your heroes?" And I said, "Well, she decided that she was going to go to pharmacy school. And this is in the 1920s. And she was one of 13 women and 300 men in her class. But she did it anyway. And she was feisty, and she was barely 5 feet tall, but you were not going to get anything over on her, right? And there was something about that presence that she had that commanded respect. And she worked for it, and she was hardcore loyal. And she said, my friend Aisha said, "You're describing yourself." I said, No, I'm describing my grandmother." She said, "No, you're describing yourself. You emulated the values that you see in your hero, your grandmother, and those are the values that are important to you. So yes, it's hardworking, and yes, it's transparency, and yes, it's authenticity, and yes, it's loyalty." But she was able to help me attach it to something. And now I see that it's so much more than that. It's being one of very few in the room and being okay with that and learning how to work with that and leverage that. So that was the first part. And then the second part, I spoke with now 9-time NBA champion Steve Kerr. He played with the Chicago Bulls. He's now the coach of the Golden State Warriors. And he's very clear on his values. And he said that he brings his values into the game every single day. And he said one of his values is that basketball needs to be fun. If it's not fun, I'm not going to be part of it anymore, but it needs to be fun. So he makes it his business to make basketball fun every day. So there's music during warm-ups for the team. And when it's somebody's birthday, they do a whole photo montage, finding pictures from different parts of their career and their youth so that basketball can always be fun. So it's not about having your values, it's about living your values. So those were the lessons that I learned from both Aisha Bursell and from NBA champion Steve Kerr, which I now pass on to everybody listening.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing those. I think the first hint makes it much easier to make it tangible, right? I mean, we can write down words and we can associate that, but if we actually make it tangible and say, okay, I want to do it like my grandma, I want to do that like this person I've seen on television, I want to do it as this author, it makes it much easier, much more relatable. Thank you so much for that. And you talked about making basketball more fun and bringing in the values each and every day. And a thought that came to my mind is talking about habits and procedures, structures. And my first question is, do you have certain habits or a structure of the day that you follow in order to tap into your own very personal success?
Yes, and this is some of the things that I've learned from the high achievers, and I write about it quite a bit in the book in the Success Factor, because I firmly believe that we cannot copy other people's habits. What works for you is not going to work for me. But what we can do is we can emulate mindsets. And I'll give you an example. You heard that high achievers wake up at 5 a.m. and they get a lot of stuff done before the rest of the world has their morning coffee. That's fantastic. But if you're a night owl and you don't go to bed till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning because you get your best work done at night, you can't wake up at 5 a.m. and be functional. You just can't. So we need to stop thinking that we can copy other people's habits, because their world is not our world. Their stressors are not our stressors. But what we can start to dig a little deeper and start peeling this onion a little bit. And what we're noticing is that it's not that they woke up at 5 a.m. It's that they figured out their peak focus hours, what I call peak cognitive hours, and they leverage that. So I happen to be a morning person. I do wake up at 5 a.m. I go to bed a lot earlier than most people, but I wake up early. And what I do is I do the work that takes the most focus in the morning, because those are my peak cognitive hours. For me, that's a lot of writing and editing, sometimes budget work. Those are things that take a lot of brain power. So I save them in for the morning. Rarely will I have a Zoom meeting in the morning. Rarely. What we have is an exception. But rarely will I do it, because that's a more passive task. I try not to respond to email so much in the morning. My meetings are in the afternoon. Anything that's more passive, I save for after lunch, when I start to get a little bit slower and things are just not as fast and not as sharp. Save that for the more passive tasks. Because what happens is, if you're going to do those Zoom meetings and respond to emails and social media during your peak focus hours, you are burning daylight. You are wasting time, because you know that during your peak focus hours, you can get more done than you can during the rest of the day. So you might as well leverage those hours.
No, absolutely. I fully agree. And I think it's very helpful to be aware of one's peak focus hours, and well, to begin with, that there is something like that, and then to figure out what is your very unique individual set of such. And maybe you can elaborate a little bit on that. How much experimenting did it take you, or how did you figure out that this really is your peak focus hours? Is that something which is now set in stone, or is this also something changing over time? I could imagine, and this is an assumption on my end, that they might change if you're writing a book, or if you're giving lectures, or if you follow different projects. Do those peak focus hours change a little bit? And how did you figure out what is your peak focus hours to begin with?
Yeah, so for me, I was always an early riser, always. But it really changed, I think, when I went back to school, that I realized that I wake up at 5 a.m. I could have my coffee by 9 a.m. Nobody was around. I finished all my assignments. I finished all my readings within 4 hours, and people were still sleeping. By the time they came down for breakfast, I had done a day's work. I tried to do it later. It didn't work. And then during COVID, I was in quarantine at the beginning for many days, and I was in quarantine in one room. And I wrote the drafts for 6 articles in 1 week. And I knocked them out in the morning. And that's when I realized that it's not enough to have quiet. It's not enough to have the meals coming to your room. It's the hours of the day when you're most focused. So I would get out of bed, run to the shower, make myself a cup of coffee, and get to work. I didn't want to burn even 1 minute of that time. And when I was writing the book, and the book was written on weekends because I work during the week, it was essentially written on weekend mornings. And and everyone knew I couldn't go out in the morning. Don't ask me to run errands in the morning. Don't ask me to drive you anywhere in the morning. I need to focus on this. The afternoon is a whole other story.
And I don't remember the podcast that it was in because it's a few years back that I actually listened to it, but it was with another author. And he basically decided that he doesn't want to be on social media or on the internet at all. He doesn't want to invest his time there because he knows that if he invests his time, his focus hours into writing all by himself and giving a book tour every 2 years, this is his best allocation of his very time. So it's also an understanding on his end that he said, even though he does like to engage with people, even though he obviously would like to get all that praise that you get in social media and on the internet if you write very good books, he said, you know what, I'm going to step back from that because my hours invested are so much more worth if I actually use them for writing. And I really like that as an example. And it sounds very similar there for you. Thanks very much.
It's so true. And, that reminds me of something that I did 2 years ago now. My phone is always on silent. Always. The only people who have emergency override are my direct family members. Everyone else, it's silent. And all social media notifications are off. Because really, what are you posting that's an emergency that I need to see immediately? Absolutely nothing. So you know when I'll get to it? When I'm so exhausted that I can't do my regular work, that's when I'll see your message. It can really wait until then. Do you know how much time that gives back to you? And it's not even the time, the focus that you get back from not checking your social media. I don't care every time somebody's doing some live event or somebody liked one of my posts. That is not earth-shattering news. That can wait. That can wait.
No, I fully agree. And just a small personal note from my end, I'm also very good with putting my phone aside and being on flight mode and so forth. And one thing that I do practice also together with my wife every once in a while when we get the time is not only have a digital detox weekend, let's call it, without phones, but we actually go a step further and go without time. So it depends on how you can accommodate that, but put away all the times, put away all the phones, and then know that there's 2 nights, or you can start with 1 day, 1 night sleeping, and that gets you into a completely different zone if you're not so bound on time. Because in our heads, we always deal with time. We always think about what's happening in 2 hours. Is that an activity for the next 4 hours? But if you also take out this component, this is something that can also, give you a lot of joy and relaxation. So if you want to try
That's
that
stressing
out,
me out. I don't know that I can do that. I'm the kind of person that's never late, right? If it's on time, it's late. So, and if you're early, you're on time. So I am very much bound to time, which drives me crazy when I see people without a watch on. I'm like, what do you mean? How do you know where you're going? I had a student that asked me, she said, how come you're never late? I said, because I plan out my day and I plan out my time so that I have time to travel, to go to a meeting, to go to wherever it is I need to go to. So I don't know. I may try what you're saying, but I'm getting like stressing me out a little.
It's for the weekends. It's for the weekends for sure. But first of all, I can definitely confirm that Ruth is on time. She was in this Zoom call before I was. And Ruth, that actually leads me to a question. How rigid of a planned schedule do you have? Do you have exact timings that you know when to take a shower, when to read your notes, when to write your journal? We didn't talk about all those components in life, but is it really all structured through, or do you have focus hours, the first from 6 to 10, and then it's rather loose end?
No, I actually, instead of having a to-do list, if I have to do things, I will actually block off time on my calendar to get it done. Otherwise, the to-do list never gets done. So if I have to email someone back, call someone back, schedule something, respond to somebody, I actually block off time on my calendar to get it done. And frankly, it's the only way it gets done.
Absolutely. I fully agree. Definitely. Ruth, I would like to use that as a little segue and go to another attribute that you're describing, and that is constantly learning. And what I find especially interesting is through informal means. But maybe we start with the easier question. Why is it so important to constantly learn, and how do you do it?
Look, we always need to upskill, and there's always something new to learn. And innovation comes from taking two disparate things and finding a new way to put them together. And we need to be able to learn and be open to learning from everyone around us, people who are senior to us at our level and people who are junior to us. And there's always something to learn. And I don't care how junior you are, there's always something that you can teach someone. It's so important. So look, I mentioned I went back to school later in life, but that's really hard. It's really hard to go back to school and have that set schedule and sit and listen to lectures and have homework and have assignments. But the better way to do it for adults is actually through informal learning. So yes, you can go to a workshop, you can hear a seminar, you can listen to a Zoom, you can go to a conference and hear a speaker, but there's so many other ways that you can learn, right? So if you think about all the billionaires, Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, Mark Cuban, they're known for reading 3 to 8 hours a day. It's not reading that made them billionaires. It's opening their mind up to new knowledge. So while for them, their informal learning is through reading. So yeah, you can read books, you can read articles, you can listen to podcasts such as this one. Hopefully you learned at least one new thing. Webinars, YouTube, LinkedIn Learning has, I think, 16,000 courses. 2 of them are mine. But you can actually learn from, I've taken over 70 LinkedIn Learning courses because there is always something new that you can learn. So find the platform that works best for you and just start soaking up new knowledge. Why don't you go down that rabbit hole instead of watching some YouTube videos that will teach you nothing?
Agree 100%, and you raise an interesting thought, and there's always something to learn, and I fully agree. There's a lot of great ways for informal learning. You could sign into university, but you can also do it on YouTube, you can do it on LinkedIn. You just mentioned quite a few ways, but how do you, Ruth, personally pick what to learn or what to develop in? Because there is just such a vast amount of information of education out there. How do you choose? Do you use, again, your passions and see what's a good fit, or do you test and trial? Do you use experimenting? How do you figure out what you want to learn next?
So it changes, and it changes a lot based on what I'm working on. It could be from a conversation I had where I hear someone sort of talking about, I heard a lecture, and this is a true story. I heard a lecture about positive psychology. This was almost 3 years ago. I never even heard of that field before. But I was sitting there in the audience and I was mesmerized. I was absolutely mesmerized. So I start going down this Google rabbit hole of studying positive psychology and finding who the big leaders are. And I have read now every article about it. I have read the books about it. I have done online courses about it because I found it so fascinating. And then I wanted, when the Success Factor came out, I wanted to learn more about book marketing. So I started reading and watching and learning everything I could about that. So what sometimes, and this is what we know from adult learners, is that their experiences drive their learning. It's something, there's a gap in what I need to know. I'm looking to fill that gap. And what are the different ways that I can fill that gap? So, I mentioned that I have taken over 70 LinkedIn Learning courses. They're on a variety of topics based on what it is so if I'm interested in networking, for example, which is something that I talk about and write about a lot, but there's always new ideas to learn. So I'll look that up and hear what other people are saying about it. I read a ton. I read 70 to 100 books a year. I'm always reading articles. I'm always having conversations with interesting people. How I interview astronauts and Nobel Prize winners and Olympic champions. So I get to have incredible conversations and see what they say that plants a seed that gets me to think about something new. And I just go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. And I believe it all starts again with blocking time on your calendar and making that available, like learning and reading and taking time for it, right?
But it's so interesting that we can actually learn while doing something else. So the great thing about podcasts such as this one and Audible books is that I listen to podcasts and Audible books during my commute. So I can drive and learn at the same time. And I do it every single day on my commute in and on my commute out. I get to work smarter than when I left the house.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you can choose the timings. I think this is also something super interesting that technology brought up, right? You don't have to be at a certain time in a certain classroom, which still has its benefits, but you can learn basically whenever you want. You can be an early riser, you can be a night owl, you can be in New York, you can be in Europe, you can be in Asia. It doesn't really matter. You have access to at least most of the learning platforms. There is a few where you need certain resources, but there is a lot of information out there and there is a lot of topics that we can learn about. A question that came to mind, Ruth, and I heard you talking about earlier also that you are an avid reader. Which books are on your night desk or on your office desk currently, and what are you reading?
So I'm always reading multiple books at the same time, but the one I'm reading right now is actually the autobiography of somebody who's in my book. He's the Olympic champion, Scott Hamilton. He won the gold medal in men's figure skating in 1984. And he wrote the book Finish First. And I'm finishing reading that book right now.
Wonderful. Thanks for that. I'm going to make sure to link that. I understand it's a recommendation and I'm going to check it out myself. I've heard about the book, but I think now it's definitely worthwhile reading it myself. And you say you read multiple books at the same time. Is that rather 2 or 3, or is that 5, 10? Curiosity
It's 3.
question.
It's always 3
Okay.
at the same time. So I always have one in print, which is often a leadership book. I have Audible, which is on my commute, which is also other leadership books, autobiographies, etc. And then on my Kindle, I like to read fiction.
Okay. So you also mix and match to a certain extent.
I mix the
and you know
mediums,
exactly.
absolutely.
Wonderful. That's super interesting. Thank you so much for sharing that, Ruth. And you talk about another major attribute, and that is perseverance. And one quote or one saying that I really liked when doing some research for this podcast is focusing on how rather than the if we talk about high achievers and success. Do you want to talk to that a little bit? And what is it that you found out with that focus?
Yeah. So one of the things that I realized with the high achievers, yeah, they have the perseverance, the resilience, the grit, whatever word you want to use. But really, it's how they approach challenges, because they have challenges just like the rest of us. Look at the Olympians. They were training for years for the Olympics, and then a pandemic broke out, and the Olympics were postponed for a year, right? But most of them didn't quit. They actually continued training. Why? Because it's the way they focus on that challenge. They never question if they'll overcome the challenge. They know they'll get over it, around it, through it. They'll get to the other side. Instead, they focus on how to overcome the challenge. What are the things I need to do in order to overcome the challenge? That makes it, instead of passive, something that's happening to them, it becomes active, what they can control. And high achievers control what they can control. They cannot control the pandemic, so that was not taking up real estate in their head, but they can focus on their workouts. They can control what they eat. They can control how they sleep. And they started training. And sometimes they had to train in their living room, train in the parks outside because the gyms were closed. They figured it out. They made it work. Unlike many of the rest of us who just said, oh, there's a pandemic, right? I can't do it. They found ways to get it done because high achievers control what they can control. They never question if they'll overcome the challenge. Instead, they focus on how to overcome the challenge. And really they are not afraid to fail because in fact, they fear not trying more than they fear failing. So they're willing to take strategic risks.
And I wanted to ask, what is their perception of failure, or does failure even exist, or is it just an attempt that didn't work that brought them closer to where they want to be? So maybe you can talk about failure and high achievers a little bit more in depth. What is the attributes that they share? Is there something like failure for a high achiever?
There certainly is. In fact, I share the stories of several astronauts. Every astronaut but one who I interviewed was not accepted on their first try when they applied to be an astronaut. They had to apply multiple times. And I share the stories. And one of the things is that they see what they learned from each failure and then make adjustments as they go. Learn, adjust, go. Learn, adjust, go. Because every failure is an opportunity for enhancement. Because what you need from the failures, you can't just let it sit there. It's what can I learn from this experience? So if we go back to the Olympics, every time the Olympian finishes their meet, their race, their whatever it is, they run to their coach. What could I have done better? What could I have done better? Because there's always something that can be done better. Because in the Olympics, a fraction of a second is the difference between first place and last place. So they're constantly seeking feedback on ways they can do it better.
And I think this is where coaching or mentoring or the combination of both, again, helps, right? Individuals, business people, sportsmen, all different disciplines. It always helps to have somebody to support, but also to challenge and to give honest advice, honest feedback. What is it that Ruth, what is it that Ishmael could have done better, or what is it next time to try differently? And yeah, maybe you could also talk a little bit about experimenting, because I would just, again, assume that most of the tools and techniques that those high achievers use are not their first attempt, but they have actually tried many different ways to solve one thing, or also to solve different things. So maybe you want to talk a little bit about the importance of experimenting and also of accepting that this might not be the right approach.
Well, look, let's talk about Apollo Anton Ono. He is the most decorated Winter Olympian. He won 7 medals in short track speed skating. He would skate around with that big bandana on his forehead. But before he ever laced up skates, he was a state champion swimmer. And this was the case with most of the Olympians, is that they were good at something else before, but they didn't love doing it. So we really have to think of ourselves like children. Children, we try all these different things. We have all these different uniforms hanging in our closet till we find what it is that we love. Somehow we lost that ability as adults to try things out. Now, the astronauts, you're not just an astronaut, right? Dr. Charlie Camarda, who I mentioned earlier, is actually an engineer. He started as an engineer. He was the head of engineering at NASA and transitioned to be an astronaut, right? So it's layering these things. It's what lesson can I learn from the other thing and learn from it. The person who, Maxine Clark, who founded Build-A-Bear Workshop, she actually used to be the president of Payless Shoes. And she learned the lessons from that to build this brand new, incredible business of Build-A-Bear Workshop. So what are these lessons that we can learn along the way? That's what's so important.
So how many would you say of those high achievers left something that they were good at in order to find something that they are great at?
All of them. They had to. All
All
of
of them,
them.
without an
All of them,
exception.
for sure. They each started out as one thing and wound up doing something else. But you know what? Think about all the people who you admire in the world. What is it that you admire about them? Right? You probably admire that they overcame something, their perseverance, not that it came easy to them. And most people start out as one thing and finish as something else. We change, so our interests change.
And that leads me to the fourth attribute, which is mindset and intrinsic motivation. And we are here on the Just Another Mindset podcast, but also I would be interested, what role does the mindset of an individual really play to plan, but also to achieve something big? What are your thoughts, Ruth?
So, when I went back to school, I remember vividly the class with Dr. Marie Volpe, who was teaching us, this is the last class that you take before you start your research. And in order to get into this program, this was at Columbia University, you had to have a lot of work experience, you had to have a master's degree. So we were all of a certain age. And she went around the room asking everyone, why in the world at this stage of your life are you back in school? Why are you doing this? And one by one, we each said our answers. And I remember sitting there listening to the answers. One person said, I want a promotion, so I need the doctorate. Another person said, I think it's prestigious and it'll help in my career. Another person said, I have this question that needs answering and I need to get this answered. And every single person said their answer. And I remember thinking, the ones who said they want it for the promotion, they're never going to finish. They're never going to finish because it's an external driver. But the ones who have this burning question, those people are going to finish. And guess what? I had a 100% accuracy rate. Those who were doing it for themselves finished, and they finished in record time. And almost all of them got what we call a line one. Line one means almost no changes. It's perfect, which is very hard to get. The ones who were doing it for the promotions, for the prestige, I think it's a decade later and I still think they haven't finished.
Super interesting. And I fully agree that intrinsic is what we should be seeking and that extrinsic can get you somewhere for sure, but it will probably not get you through a program like that because, you just need perseverance and you need a lot of time and you need a lot of passion for what you do. But let's try to dig a little bit deeper there. And because usually, Ruth, extrinsic and intrinsic is not black and white. So maybe you can share with us a little bit, how do you realize or how do you challenge yourself? Is this something intrinsic? Is this intrinsic motivation for myself? Or do I tell myself I want this and that because other people told me it's prestigious or told me it would be cool to have a doctorate? And so how do you figure out yourself, really, this is something intrinsic, this is the motivation that I want to have? I don't know if you have some tools or techniques or thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think you really need to ask yourself, why are you doing this? Why are you putting yourself through it? And then, I remember there were people who were always, they needed to see the US Open. They needed to see the game. They needed to see when a new movie came out. They needed to see this. And I was like, how do you, no, focus on what we're doing. The games will still be there next year. The games will be there next year. Finish this. Get this done, right? And you have to see why you're not getting it done. What is the real reason that you keep looking for excuses, that you keep procrastinating? Because think about when you were a kid in school. Usually the homework you did first was what came easiest, right? And the ones you procrastinated on were the ones that you didn't love so much. Why are you procrastinating? When you procrastinate, that will shed some light as to, I got to look deeper into this.
So, follow-up question, do you procrastinate? And if so, what do you do against it? Or what do you learn from those activities that you procrastinate?
It depends what I'm doing. So if I'm procrastinating on something, I said, oh, maybe this is something that I like, that I really like, that I need to dive deeper into. But when I'm procrastinating, I say, what am I procrastinating from? What is it that I don't like doing with this? Is it because it's not fulfilling? Is it because it's hard? Is it because it's new and I don't really know how to do it and I'm afraid? What are the reasons that I'm procrastinating? And I think those are the questions that need to be answered.
Oh, absolutely. And that's very good questions to ask oneself. And Ruth, also, if we talk about intrinsic motivation or motivation as a whole, there is something which you call strong worth ethics. Why is that so important? And what do you even understand it to be?
The strong work ethic is when everyone else is ready to give up, you are not ready to give up. You are not, because you need to figure this out. You need to figure this out. Curtis Martin was one of the people who I interviewed for the book. He is an NFL Hall of Famer. He's a linebacker. He outworked everyone. And he said, I'm going to outwork everyone. And it's not about working longer. It's about working smarter. And he was willing to put in the work. And to him, that was important. And he loved it.
Wonderful. Thanks for sharing. And that actually brings me to another very important component, and that is you worked in the financial industry yourself. I worked as a management consultant. I'm not saying that there's only high achievers, but there is certainly people who work a lot or who work at least long hours. And you just said that there's people who want to outwork everyone, and this is also an attribute of a high achiever. But is there also certain things that high achievers must be aware of, as in, yes, don't work harder, work smarter. It doesn't help if you work 18 hours a day. It's much better to work n hours or to work smarter. I don't know if you have some hints and tips for also the audience, because there's quite a few people who consider themselves to be high achievers or who work in those industries, and working harder is not the only solution, I believe.
Outworking everyone does not mean you're working longer hours. It means, as what we were discussing earlier, you're leveraging your peak performance hours. You know when you work best, what are the tasks you are doing during those hours, because you will get more done during those hours than you will the rest of the day. So sometimes reshuffling your activities of what you're doing during the day is going to make you significantly more productive. It is not about working longer days. It's about leveraging your peak performance hours.
And what is maybe tangible signs that you shall pivot or rethink your work structure? I don't know if something comes to mind, or if you talk to high achievers that they are experiencing this and that, and then they took a step back, rethought the whole situation, rethought their approach, and then continued a different way. I don't know if something comes to mind.
Yeah, that's actually something we learn a lot from the scientists. So a lot of the Nobel Prize winners who I spoke with, they talked about, yes, you can't let an idea go. Sometimes you can't let an idea go, but sometimes you need to know when to shelf the idea. Wait for the technology to develop, which is somebody else's work. And then when the technology is there, you can go back to it. So you need to know sometimes when to stop. And a lot of that comes with experience, and a lot of that is by surrounding yourself with good mentors.
Absolutely. And I think that requires quite a bit of trust in yourself and the capability to understand that this technology will come, because I can only imagine that if you're an high achiever and you want to get something done and you see at the horizon, okay, in 10 to 15 years, they are maybe talking about this and that technology that will help me to solve this challenge, I'm just gonna call it. It's a long 10 or 15 years if you're not able to solve it until then, and to then find something else to work on. Okay, yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, but they always have multiple challenges they're working on.
Exactly right. Exactly right. Wonderful. Ruth, I have a few questions that I ask each and every one of my podcast guests. But before we go there, my first question, I'm sure that people want to find out more about yourself and want to reach out. Where can they do so, and how do you interact, engage, communicate with them?
Absolutely. So my name is Ruth Gotian, Gotian. The website is just my name, Ruth Gotian. All social media is just my name. And if you want to know where to get the book, The Success Factor, anywhere in the world, just go to ruthgotian.com/book, and it'll direct you everywhere in the world where you can get it.
And I will absolutely make sure to link all the socials and, of course, also the opportunity to get your hands on the Success Factor book. It really is a great read. I can confirm that. And talking about books, Ruth, what are books that you recently gifted other than your own?
Other than my own. So my mentor, Dr. Marshall Goldsmith, who wrote the foreword to The Success Factor, he just came out with his book called The Earned Life, which is a great book. It's his 4th New York Times bestseller. It's a fantastic book. And another great book is by Dr. Robert Lefkowitz. He's one of the Nobel Prize winners who's featured in my book. And he recently came out with his autobiography, which is hysterical. And it's called A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to Stockholm. Stockholm, of course, is where they give out the Nobel Prize. So that's by Robert Lefkowitz. I recommend both of those books.
Wonderful. That's 2 new titles for my reading list. Thank you so much, Ruth, for sharing that. And before we go into the 3 last-ish, I want to call them questions because we never know where they're going to take us. But is there something that you have on your mind that we didn't talk about sufficiently today, or that you want to share with the audience?
I think we hit all of them. And look, I just remind people we're in a crazy world right now. We don't know what new challenge is going to hit us next. So what I tell people, and this is the great lesson I learned from the high achievers, is control what you can control. You don't need to control everything, just control what you can control.
Wonderful. Yeah. Focus on what you have in control, because everything else you anyways don't have an impact on. Thanks for that, Ruth, for that reminder. And that brings me to my first of the 3 questions, and that is, what influenced or motivated you over the past week?
Well, I was recently, I spoke about Marshall Goldsmith. So I am part of what's called the 100 Coaches, which is a group of the top coaches in the world. And we recently had our retreat. And it was led by Marshall Goldsmith. And all the people who I've known, but many who I've never got to meet in person yet, just on Zoom, we finally got to meet in person. And we got to learn not just from Marshall, but we also got to learn from each other. And that just filled my well in a way that nothing else can. It's the ability to be back and learn with others and from others that inspires me.
Sounds like a wonderful event and opportunity to learn from each other, with each other, and for each other. Thank you very much for sharing that, Ruth. And the second question would be, usually it is, who are your mentors and whom do you look up to? But for you, I would like to rephrase it and ask you, who are your heroes?
So my hero, as I mentioned, is definitely my grandmother Esther, who was, 2 generations older than me. But I am the only woman in my family in 4 generations, the only natural born. Everyone else had to marry in. And my grandmother was more like a sister. And I learned so much just by observing her about how to be a force and how to say what it is that you want and need, and say it with elegance. And she passed away decades ago, but she is still top of mind every single day.
Wonderful. Yeah. Thank you very much for that very personal insight, and yeah, for that great inspiration. And as you said, I think you learned a lot and you create ripple effects to give back, give further that learning. So acknowledgement for that. Thank you very much, Ruth. The third and final question, and that's a rather hypothetical one. I call it the 3 truths. And Ruth, I would like you to imagine yourself traveling in space, all by yourself, and actually for quite some time. It could be months, it could be even a few years. And after a long travel, you encounter a human-like species. And they can only process 3 facts or 3 truths about humanity before they decide whether or not they want to get to know us. What do you tell them?
This is hard. 3 things about humanity. There's good in everyone if you look for it. There are answers to questions you don't even know exist yet. And there will be people who can help you find those answers.
Wonderful. I love it. There is good in people, there is questions, there's answers, and we shall seek. Ruth, thank you so much for being a guest on the Just Another Mindset podcast. And if you have any final words for the audience, it's all yours.
Thank you. I really just hope to leave the audience with the push that I got from the high achievers, is that fear not trying more than you fear failing.
Thank you so much, Ruth.
My pleasure.
If you enjoy and learn from the Just Another Mindset podcast, please make sure to share this episode with a friend or two and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcast. And if you want to receive a brief overview of what made me think over the past week and join like-minded individuals, you may want to sign up to my weekly newsletter. It is easy to sign up. It is super easy to unsubscribe again. You will get information on the newest podcast episode, and you will also get an overview of the content, books, and podcasts mainly, that I am consuming, and I evaluate what I've learned over the past week. You will also get your weekly dose of optimism, because you will receive the Smile News with 7 things that went right this week. And finally, you will get access to all my speaker notes that you can use to follow exercises and answer questions discussed in the podcast. Just follow the link in my bio to sign up for my newsletter, and I'm already excited to see you on the other side. If there is any future topic or guest that you would like to hear more about on the Just Another Mindset podcast, please let me know by leaving a comment on YouTube or sending a mail directly to contact@ishmaelwondergarten.com. And if nobody told you lately, be reminded that you are worthy, you matter, and you can achieve anything.
Do more of what makes you happy.
Be yourself, be positive.
Change.
Just another mindset.